Dan, good of you to give this talk. We are in the middle of picking new residents, and Dan's talk is about what happens after the residency and how you must plan for that, which is very important. And I think, believe it or not, some of your faculty are big national, international experts on such topics. So take advantage of them. And Dan is just one.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Bob and I and Greg, we go around, we give talks at Grand Rounds. I was just a visiting professor out in Boston, and I gave a talk on really cervical disc arthroplasty and the literature behind it and that type of stuff. And that was reasonably well received at the talk. But at dinner, I started talking about some of these issues, and the residents really had me pinned to the chair for quite some time over these issues. This is a talk that I gave at the spine section at the complications course. And every time I give the talk, I think that this goes towards the life lessons for the residents and the business lessons for the residents that we often maybe don't teach enough of during residency. These are my disclosures. The main disclosure was my experience as the secretary of the ABNS. During my 6 years there, and I saw a lot of stuff that I really, kind of thought happened but didn't know happened, and was able to interact closely with a group of folks who their main job is trying to keep neurosurgeons out of trouble. And there were some common themes that came up, and I just wanted to sort of try to put you guys ahead of the curve in terms of watching out for common mistakes made by young diplomats. Now, when you finish residency, you're going to have to go out and get a job, and there are different jobs for different folks, and are good for some folks and not good for other folks, and there are individual circumstances which will determine what's a good job and what's a bad job. Your family situation, what does your spouse do? How many kids do you have? Where's your spouse's family from? Where's your family from? All these things will weigh into the decision. Also, your subspecialty interests. There may not be a whole lot of private practice jobs in rural North Carolina if you're a DBS specialist or an open vascular specialist. And geographical constraints. There may be reasons due to family health, due to relatives needing you around, due to childcare restraints, where you need to be in a certain region of the country for a reason, which will make a particular job more or less attractive as you're evaluating it. And also, when you're looking at jobs, there are multiple different employment circumstances. So the traditional model, when I was a resident, this is uphill in the snow both ways, world was up by fire, all that type of stuff. The prevalent model was private practice, meaning that a group of neurosurgeons owned a business, which was the practice of neurosurgery, and that private practice would contract with hospitals, and the hospitals would make an arrangement to support those practitioners while they operated at their hospital, and then obviously the hospital would benefit from their activities by billing for the services the hospital provided. Those private practices were generally made up of the senior partners, hopefully more than one or two, who owned the practice, and then they would bring in junior partners who would be essentially indentured servants for a certain specific period of time, and then become partners in the business as well. And the reason why they were indentured servants for a period of time was to basically buy their way into the investment that the senior partners had made in the practice prior to their arrival. Academic practice at that time, when I came out and now, is between 35 and 45% of the jobs. And these jobs are the jobs that I have. And these jobs are the jobs that are the easiest to transition to, because you've all grown up in this model. So you know what this looks like. The advantages of academic practice are that the contract is going to be boilerplate. You're almost always an employee of a state, of a large institution with a very vigorous HR vetting process. So there's really very few hidden hidden landmines in academic practice. The downsides of academic practice is that it may not match your geographical constraints or family situation. If you're going to have a subspecialty focus, and there's going to be some requirement for academic productivity, which is going to take away from your clinical productivity to some extent, which is going to result in your salary not being as high as it would be in private practice or in other salaried positions. That said, I'm a big advocate for academic practice because I think it's the most fun you can possibly have, but that's a separate issue. What's emerged over the last 20 years are these hospital employed positions, and these can be good and these can be bad. In general, these are salaried positions where you are offered a salary, and the expectation is that you will do a certain amount of work to earn that salary. Depending upon what the situation is, this may or may not be a reasonable or safe hypothesis. The biggest problem, and I think the biggest problem we see, are these hospital employed jobs that offer a tremendously high signing bonus and a tremendous salary, a salary that is more than the mean salary for a full professor of neurosurgery and academics for a starting hospital employed physician in a community. The problem with this is that as you come out of residency, these are the contracts that are going to get you into the most trouble. The signing bonuses can often be used as almost predatory loans, meaning that if you don't meet your RVU targets, you have to give that money back. Well, I mean, you may have already spent that money. You may have used it to pay off some debts. You may have bought a Lamborghini. I don't know. You may have already spent them. You may not have it to give back, in which case your period of service obligation to that organization will be extended in order to allow you to pay off that debt. Similarly, the salary you get is dependent upon a RVU target, and if you don't meet that RVU target, you don't get that salary. If you are cautious and staying within your box, that's probably okay. That's probably reasonable. You're just going to be there forever. If you are if you've spent the money, you've bought a giant house and 3 cars and an airplane, and you're not meeting that RV target, that could be a real problem for you. And if you are induced into doing stupid things, such as surgeries that don't need to be done, that can be a really big problem for you. I'll talk a little bit more about this down the road. We'll have to answer questions for the things that we've seen. And then, of course, there are hybrid models, the private-demic models, there are hybrid models between these as well, which can be unique from place to place. So some common principles when you're evaluating job opportunities. If it seems too good to be true, it almost certainly is. Why would a hospital be offering $1.5 million a year for a neurosurgeon fresh out of training? Likely, it's an awful job, and likely they've had trouble keeping people in that job, so they have to do something to get people to come look at that job. I mentioned the RVU targets and the predatory loans of the bonuses. Often, not always, but often the situation is that the hospital has now come under new management because of financial difficulties. The new management has noticed that the private practice neurosurgery group is a pain in the butt to deal with. They want support, they want stipends to cover call, and they want they want salary support in addition to the privileges in order to bring their cases to the hospital. Well, the hospital says, well, geez, we could do a lot better if we controlled this. So we're going to hire our own guys. So we're going to, or our own neurosurgeons. So we're going to eliminate the privileges for this private practice group, which has been in town here for 30 years and has 6 or 7 very prominent local neurosurgeons. And we're going to hire 2 or 3 guys of our own, and they're going to run our neurosurgery service for our hospital system. And these private practice guys, we're just going to fire them essentially. Well, so then what happens is you have a bright and shiny new neurosurgeon walking into a community where you don't have very many friends. There's not too many people. There's nobody at the institution to serve as a mentor because you're now the neurosurgeon at the mentor. The neurosurgeons in town don't like you because they just got fired because of you. So instead of having mentors to take care of you, you have competitors to throw stones at you as you're trying to get established in practice. Plus, you have an RVU target, and plus you're a bit under the thumb of the hospital system. So it's easy to get into a bad situation. So you need to make sure to vet opportunities actively. I just had a talk with Paul about one of the opportunities he was looking at, and we talked about some of these exact issues. So some common issues. We talked about the signing bonuses. These may simply be predatory loans, large guaranteed salaries, and what's the payback? Paul showed me a contract where he was expected off the bat to be doing 10,000 RVUs per year. Well, that's, if you're a private practice neurosurgeon doing mostly spine, and you're 5-6 years out, that's probably reasonable. If you're just starting out, that's probably a big ask. And so what's the penalty for not reaching that RVU commitment? There can be complicated contracts that you're not equipped to deal with. There are things like there are non-compete clauses, which I don't know if you read the newspapers or Becker's, if you get the emails from Becker's Spine, but the orthopedic group over at St. Mary's has just bailed out of St. Mary's over a conflict about ownership of a ambulatory surgery center, and they're being sued. And one of the main tenets of that lawsuit is that they're violating a non-compete clause. It turns out that the enforceability of non-compete clauses varies from state to state. In Wisconsin, they're not really very enforceable. In Illinois, they're very enforceable. But you need to know this prior to signing it, and you need to know that you're signing something like this. What's the path to partnership? When are you in a private practice? When do you become a partner? I know of a group in Indiana who is notorious for separating with their junior partners literally months before they're slated to become a full partner. And there's always an excuse. Oh, it just wasn't working out. His practice didn't match our needs. Blah 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 blah. But a lot of this is taking advantage of folk you don't want to be taken advantage of. So, and if you're in academics, you need to know what your path to promotion is. Here at UW, we have probably 5 different tracks to promotion. You need to know which track you're on. That the track that you're on needs to make sense for you, and you need to know what the requirements are for you to be promoted. Because if you're not promoted on that track, you may be terminated, depending upon the track and the rules of the institution. And finally, local politics, which is something that is very difficult to understand from afar. This has to be a boots on the ground type assessment. Again, in academics, this is not as big an issue, but it's still an issue. I talked about Indiana before, but look at what's happening at the University of Indiana. The local politics there have really completely changed the landscape of that practice. But particularly in these hospital-employed positions, you need to know what is going on, because you want to have mentors and friends when you begin practice. You don't need naysayers throwing stones as you're trying to get off the ground. A tip: you want to take care of your business as early as possible. You want to take care of your ABNS issues as soon as possible. Currently, when you graduate, you are required to register with Post and enter 10 cases within the first 6 months for review by the directors. The purpose of this really is to get you into Post and get you familiar with the process of entering cases as soon as possible. It also allows the ABNS directors to see if someone is obviously off the rails in their first 6 months. Whether or not this would have caught Dunch, I don't know. He had already murdered 30 people in his first 6 months. It might have been too little too late for him as well. But it is an opportunity for the ABNS directors just to have a tiny light into your practice early on. If that submission is approved, you then enter another 115 cases, and you have to have at least 3-month follow-up on all these cases by the time that the submission is approved. Now, it takes time to enter these cases, especially if you do this retrospectively. If you do this prospectively, you'll save hours of work. I still maintain the database that I started for my board submission back, in the Stone Age. The only difference is I don't have the pictures, which you guys are required to have. We didn't have electronic pictures in those days, so there was no requirement for it. Doing this prospectively will save you hours of work. A, because you have the pictures at your fingertips because you just did the case. B, you know the case when you're entering the information in, so it'll make more sense to the reviewer. And then all you need to do is come back at 3 months and in your Excel spreadsheet and document whatever follow-up you have. Take this seriously. This submission reflects your practice. A sloppy case submission is indicative to the directors of a sloppy practice. Neurosurgery is not something that does well when it's performed sloppily. And so a sloppy case submission will raise the interest of the reviewers, and you don't want to have interested reviewers. You want reviewers to be bored. You want them to be looking for things to talk about. You want them to be wondering how long it's going to take them to get through your case log because this is so boring. That's what you want. You do not want us to be interested, excited, or at all. You don't want your submission to be memorable in any way. Remember that every single case is looked at by a director. Directors are people who are 20, 30 years in practice, who are 2/3 of them are academicians. The others are senior private practitioners. We all of us have other stuff going on. We don't have time for bullshit or sloppy submissions. If your submission is sloppy and the director gets pissed off about it, they're just going to send it back to you and say we want a new one. Well, it takes a long time to get these cases done, and there is a time frame limitation, which I'll talk about in just a second. If your case log comes back to you, there could be queries where a director will just simply say, I need this further information on this group of cases. You could be asked to modify your case log, redo all your coding, for example, or it could be rejected, in which case you have to come in for you have to submit a new case log or come in for a hearing, which is something that you really don't want to do. The last thing you really want to do as a young neurosurgeon is sit in a room with 12 senior grumpy neurosurgeons and have to defend your practice to them when they clearly have an issue with what you're doing. So you have to remember that you have to pass the oral examination within 7 years of completing residency. And this means that you have to pass the oral examination within 7 years of completing residency, which means there's a problem if you don't pass the oral examination within 7 years of completing residency. And a repetition is good, to quote Ed Benzel. You need to have this in the back of your minds at all times. And where the issue comes in is, say you're a little bit late getting started logging your cases for a number of reasons. You decide to take off 3 or 4 months. You join a practice that's kind of slow, or you're in private practice in LA where the volume is very, very low, or you change your jobs in the first few years and decide that you're going to throw away those first couple of years and get started at your new place. Or you do a sloppy job getting your case log together and it gets sent back to you. You have to remember that about 15% of first-time candidates will fail the oral examination, every exam. So that means that about 50% of first-time candidates fail the examination. That's 1 in 6 candidates fail the examination every examination. And these are all people who have never failed an examination before, right? These are all you guys. You've done well on the MCATs. You've done well on the boards. You passed the oral examinations. You got through the anatomy examination. You've been through all this. All the hoops have been thrown. You jumped through and made it. Yet 1 out of 6 of you is going to fail this examination because it's a hard examination. Failure rates for repeat candidates are higher, and if you fail twice, you have to submit a new case log with 75 new cases. So if you realize that the examination is offered every 6 months, it takes even the fastest submitter to about a year to get on that list to take the case. Because remember, you have to have 125 cases with 3 months follow. So that takes at least most people takes about a year just to get that data together. So you're 18 months in, assuming everything goes smoothly. If you putz around, if you submit late, if you submit a sloppy submission, and then you're taking your examination in your 6th year, there could be a real problem if you fail this examination. If you fail the exam 3 times, or if you time out, you have to start over. You have to retake the written examination and present a brand new case log, and then have another attempt at the oral examinations after that. Unfortunately, during that time period, when you're working way back into the system, you are no longer considered board eligible or tracking towards certification. Therefore, you're not certified. And at this, if you don't have the board certified or tracking towards certification label through the ABNS, you are really only marginally employable during this time period. At any academic center or large private practice center or large hospital system, you're not going to be employable and you might lose your job. There are board ineligible or non-board certified neurosurgeons practicing in the United States. These are largely practicing at physician-owned hospitals which do their own credentialing, and they're largely serving as indentured servants. This is how the Laser Spine Institute worked for years and years. They had a number of foreign medical graduates or U.S. graduates who weren't board certified who were churning out cases for a salary that was well below market rates, but they couldn't go anywhere because they weren't board certified. Not a great life. And as you know, the Laser Spine Institute eventually went bankrupt because of nefarious business practices. So most in the situation are going to lose their jobs, and that's a very bad situation to be in. Other common practices, common principles early in practice. Don't get greedy. I talked about these RVU-based payment targets providing perverse incentives. There is nothing wrong with getting paid for doing more work. If you are working your butt off, you're the only guy covering a trauma center, and you're working, that you should be richly rewarded for this. However, there's everything wrong with doing more work to get paid more. So you got to pay attention to your indications and realize that folks like me and Greg and Bob are looking at these things, and Benny. Be conservative. Every time you book a case, think of the M&M presentation that you're going to make in case things go sideways. I still do. I've got 3 cases that I'm terrified, and I'm hoping not to have to present at M&M. But I have the presentation made. Be compassionate. Is this what you would want done to you? Would you really want to have the bilateral SI implants done in your grandma who has back pain? These things. Be realistic. Approximately half of neurosurgeons will leave their first job in the first 2 to 5 years. So you want to have a plan B. We've been relatively fortunate here in Wisconsin, and part of it's just Madison is such a nice place to live. We've not had that turnover, but it is very, very common for folks to leave the first year in the first 2 to 5 years. So you need to have a plan B, and you have to understand that having a plan B will require that you've taken care of business during plan A. So it is much easier to be mobile if your board stuff is taken care of before you start moving around. Once you change jobs, you will no longer have access to the records from your previous job, meaning that you're not going to be able to go back and get those films if you didn't enter them prospectively into your database, meaning that you're not going to be able to go back and look up what the follow-up was because you no longer have access to that database. So again, the importance of accruing your data prospectively and the importance of taking care of your business as soon as possible. Secondly, you want to take advantage of your new wealth. No matter what job you take, even if you take the lowest paying academic job out there, you're still going to be making several times your residency fellowship salary. At this point in your life, you've not yet accumulated your lifestyle expenses. You're probably not yet divorced. You've not bought a plane. You've not made questionable investments in Bitcoin because you haven't had the opportunity yet. And you're not yet paying multiple college tuitions. Now, you do want to pay off debt. You want to pay your quarterly taxes. You want to start your retirement saving plans immediately because length in the market is the most important determinant of success in long-term investment strategies. And you do want to open up a 527 plan for your kids immediately. It's just a no-brainer. It's tax-free savings for your kids' college education. And it's not a lot. So carve out the 527 plan, carve out the most you can put into your retirement savings immediately, and then use the rest of your excess income to pay off your debt early on. It really pays off because depreciating assets do not reward you as much as paying off debt, which you're going to have to pay off at some point anyway. So be smart, especially early on. Don't be an idiot. There are many temptations that will come knocking at your door as a young neurosurgeon out in the community. Industry. It is great to work with industry to develop new technologies. It is great to have ideas. It is great to develop intellectual property. It is not great to use instrumentation based upon a kickback scheme predicated on a phony speakers bureau agreement or a consultantship which pays you an exorbitant amount of money for doing very little work, with the understanding that you'll be helping the company market their devices. Look at if you are approached for an industry relationship, look at that contract closely. The larger companies aren't going to do this. The Medtronics and Zimmers and such, they're not going to do this. It's the smaller companies who are trying to get a foothold. They're going to do this. So you look very closely at this, and you might want to have a lawyer look at such contracts, and also just look at it in the context of common sense. Am I really worth that much? If the answer is probably no, stay away from that. Hospitals. I recently had the opportunity to evaluate a case of a neurosurgeon who was being essentially paid kickbacks by hospitals to bring his patients to that hospital. He was a private practitioner in an area where there were many hospitals competing for neurosurgery cases, because for every dollar that we make, the hospital makes between 10 and 15. So they want us to come to those hospitals. And a hospital system was essentially paying neurosurgeons consulting fees or bribes so that the neurosurgeons would bring the cases to those hospitals. It got found out, did not end well. I think one of the more amusing anecdotes from that case is we invited that surgeon in for a hearing, and he informed us that he was on sabbatical. When we inquired a little bit further into what was going on, it turned out that his sabbatical was a term in a federal prison, which we thought was probably a bit of a misleading representation of his time off of practice when the hearing eventually occurred. Physician-owned distributorships. They sound too good to be true, and they are too good to be true. With Medtronic, we have a group of folks who are our distributors. They don't make the device. They sell the device to us. They bring the device in, and they service us. They provide service in the ORs. They make a lot of money for what they do. Physician groups have said, well, geez, we could do that. We know these instrumentations. We don't need these middlemen. We will create a distributorship. We will purchase the implants at a discounted rate from the manufacturers, and then we'll sell them to ourselves at the market rate, and we'll make a fortune because we don't have the middleman, and we get to keep this markup going forward. Turns out that's illegal. It's called it's illegal and unethical in many ways, and they have been led to the downfall of a number of neurosurgical practices throughout the country. This was this upper left is one Reliant company. This was a court brought by the Department of Justice, people you don't want to be hearing from. Here's a medical doctor in Oregon who was basically committing fraud, Medicare fraud, by implanting unnecessary instrumentation into Medicare patients. He went to jail also. So you need to be very careful, and I would be very loath to recommend involvement in any of these particular practices. Now, if you're in private practice, there are practice-owned resources that make money, such as the practice owns an MRI scanner, for example, or has an investment in a chiropractor or physical therapy group, or owns an ASC. These are legitimate ways of making money, and in fact, in many private groups, these types of services are how they make the majority of their money. You just need to be very, very careful to protect yourself against potential violations of Stark laws, which inhibit self-referral. So if I'm seeing a patient in clinic and I think that they need an MRI scan, I really am not supposed to send them to the MRI scan that I own. There are exceptions to this if it's the only MRI scanner in town, blah, 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 blah. But you have to be very, very careful on how those arrangements are set up to avoid trouble. If you are looking at a private practice job and these things exist, you want to talk to the business manager about how they've set this up, and you may want to have somebody review that arrangement for you prior to signing on as an employee or as an owner. Shifting gears a bit, preparing for complications. Complications during residency are generally a learning opportunity. We just had our M&M where we talked about a number of complications, and we all tried to find out what can we learn from this. And rarely are residents put in a position where they can cause a significant complication independently. And rarely are the residents held accountable for acting on the direction of attending. And I honestly don't recall losing much sleep over complications as a resident. That said, we were averaging 130 hours a week of working, so sleeping was something that happened with whether you're worrying about something or not. But in general, I felt covered. I felt that I was doing what I was told. And if something bad happened, that sucked. I felt bad about it, but that was part of why I was in residency. I was learning. Complications in early practice can be life-altering. My first major complication occurred in 1999 with an iliac vein injury during an ALIF. I didn't injure the vein. I wasn't the one retracting the vein. This occurred in 1999. I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that case. I still lose sleep over every real and perceived complication that happens. I still lose sleep over the access center calls when an hour later I'm thinking, well, maybe I could have handled that better. And a few bad complications early in practice can ruin your career. You don't want to be known as the dangerous guy. You don't want to be perceived as vulnerable to medical legal persecution, particularly if you're in a non-protected environment, such as a hospital employed position. You also want to worry about, what does the hospital think about you? Now, hospitals are pretty brutal. If you're making money for them, they may not care so much. This is the lesson, one of the lessons you learn from the Dunch experience, and some of the lessons we've learned from other rogue neurosurgeons out there. But you want to avoid being behind the 8 ball on this, particularly, as I said, if you're in a non-protected environment. If you're in a protected environment, such as here, you'll have mentors. You'll have people who say, hey, hold on a second. Maybe you shouldn't be doing that type of stuff, or let me help you with your next one. But that's not the case. How do you deal with complications? Disclose. The nurses joke about my pre-op notes. I disclose the complications before they've happened because, as you get more experience, you can smell them coming. Early on, you may not have that experience. Judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from a lack of judgment. As it comes, and coming out, you do have the benefit of having 7 years of exposure, but you don't have years of your own decisions at that point. You want to fix the complication. Don't send the complication away. You want to embrace the complication, fix it. It's okay to apologize. I'm sorry this happened. This is a complication. We know this happens sometimes. I'm sorry it happened to you. And we'll try to work through it. Get help from your mentors, and this is key. I'm sure Greg, Bob, Benny. We all get calls from past residents, and never once is it, how do I put this screw in this spot, or how do I do this osteotomy, or how do I, clip this aneurysm? It's, I got this guy in clinic, I don't know what to do, or I tried this, this is what happened, how do I get out of this? Those are the calls we get. And you also need to learn to forgive yourself, and this is hard. We all feel that we are kings of the world, and that we're all, we should be as close to perfect as possible, but we're not, and you do make mistakes, and you do need to fix the mistake, apologize, figure out what you're going to do difference, and then let go a little bit. There was a book that was about the Pittsburgh training program back in the day called Forgive and Remember, meaning that something bad happens, fix it, forgive yourself, but don't forget what happened so that it doesn't happen again. Be honest with yourself. If you're in a bad situation, it's okay to get out. I said, 40-50% of neurosurgeons leave in the first 2 to 5 years. You're not the only person who's been in a bad situation. And the job that you're in, maybe it's not right for you, but it might be perfect for somebody else. Maybe their family situation is different. Maybe their geographical wants and needs are different. Maybe their brother-in-law is the hospital CEO. It may be a good job for somebody else. It's okay if the job is not good for you. It's okay to move on. find a good mentor. Seeing things from a different perspective is very valuable. You may be approaching a corner and seeing it as needing to make a right turn when someone coming from the other street is looking to make a left turn to get to the same goal. And this seems like a bit of a vague concept, but having other folks look at what you're doing, asking questions from folks who have been there, who have done that. I mean, the spine conference we have, just talking with two other surgeons, helps a lot. And when you're out there early on by yourself, having someone you can rely on, hopefully it's someone in your community, hopefully it's someone you can have a cup of coffee with and sit down and show cases to. But if you don't have that in your community, use your faculty, use your fellowship mentors, use your residency mentors to some extent. You are eventually going to have someone at home because the long distance relationships become tiresome. You are going to eventually want to have somebody at home to do this, but in the meanwhile, it's okay to reach back in time a little bit. You have to find some balance in life. Now, balance in neurosurgery is a myth. It doesn't exist. You wouldn't be in this room if you had balance. You're in this room because you're insane and you're driven and you've adopted a career which is consuming. As a neurosurgeon, as soon as people know you're a neurosurgeon, that is now your identity. Whether or not you're in the hospital, at a cocktail party, or wherever, it becomes a consuming profession. Every conversation, everything you do is like, boy, would a neurosurgeon want to be perceived in this way? It is a consuming job. It's not like, I don't mean to cast aspersions, but if your job is to drive a school bus, your identity isn't the school bus driver per se. That's something you do to make some money so you can ease your retirement and have some cash to pay some bills and to play with your grandkids. That's not who you are. Whereas with neurosurgery, it is who you are. You need to find ways to get out of your own head. You got to get out of your own way. So find something you're bad at. Go play music with people who are better than you. Exercise to clear your mind. Enjoy your family as much as you can. Go do fun things in your profession or outside your profession, but get out of your head and do something to stop the voices, because the voices can get quite loud at times. And good luck. On the road to success, there are no shortcuts. Clearly, this picture is here because it is ironic. Do the best you can. Use your mentorship. Use your mentors that you have here as you move forward. Develop new ones, and keep first principles first. Do no harm. Do what's best for the patient. Be ethical. Take your time. Take care of your own business and protect yourself. And that concludes my talk. Thank you very much for your attention. I know it was short on purpose. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Fabulous talk. Thanks very much. Questions, please. A lot of these
I was
nightmares
hoping
have happened
to
here.
let the residents talk, but if they have any questions.
I was chatting with the residents in Boston just a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about these issues. And one of the folks who had just taken a hospital employee job says, "Gosh, it sounds like the hospitals don't really care about you at all." It was like, yeah, you're right. They don't. You're a revenue center for them to a great extent.
So, Dan, I thought this was a great talk, and it's interesting how many of those things I'm sure you taught me as a resident these things, but how many of those things I took to heart when I was starting out, because I essentially, kind of positioned myself when I was starting out. I kind of gave myself a 2-year plan, a 5-year plan, and a 10-year plan. And my 2-year plan was very simple, which was just simply to pass my boards.
Yeah.
So that, and once I had that done, then I was worrying about academic promotion and different projects and things like that. But if you don't pass your boards, you can't get to any other part of neurosurgery. So that's very critical. And I would say, because of this risk that you take a job and you leave within 2 years, just find a job at a minimum that you're going to be able to pass your boards in. I mean, that would be like my main first job, minimum is can I pass my boards?
Or just stick it out until you get that done. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, it's great to have 5 and 10-year plans. My only advice would be to write them in pencil, because things change, circumstances change. You find yourself going in one door and such. But have a plan, but be flexible, and as opportunities, particularly if you're in academics, as opportunities arise, things may change. Just accept that and that's okay.
In many ways, academics has more opportunities or different avenues, and that's an important thing to keep track of too. Because you're not going to turn out the way you thought, and it may be better, but it'll be different.
All right. Well, thanks all for your attention, and I'll be here all day. So
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Sure.
Bye.